record.
Perfect.
Boom. So yeah, hi Christoph. It's good a bit like we're always very rough and ready with these. So we'll just record and see what comes out. But yeah, it was really interesting. We were having you sent me a fascinating question, and I'm going to pull it up now from the many. Where is it? But it was about how do you handle this idea of not having a vision?
Yeah, yeah,
Is there
yeah.
a need for vision in strategy?
More or less. So yeah,
More or
so I
less.
discovered coming from like the usual products. I think like what a lot of people are exploring is like first vision, then strategy, then tactics, more or less. Um, I'm completely aware that this is a simplified model, that there's a lot of back and forth and so on and so on. But like just like I explored a little bit Asturian, but also like other like things from Dave Snowden and other people in the complex field. And like something I saw, that vision is always never mentioned. So I was really wondering like if you have any insights there, if this is like by design, so it shouldn't be a vision, or you shouldn't make it explicit. You already answered a little bit in the mail, which I found really interesting. Um, because you said like, yeah, it's like not don't have vision,
Yeah. Well,
don't
so
make it
just to
explicit. Yeah,
like step back and go, what are we talking
yeah,
about? So the Esturine framework is it's a framework. It's a complexity framework, a framework for working in complexity. As a framework, it's not a model. So it's not a way of saying how the world works. It gives you a tool for looking at the world in a different way. And that's really what it's all about. And it is what I would call a side casting method. So
mm,
what we're contrasting against there is a backcasting type method, which is set a vision of an ideal future that we'd like to get to, and then define the gap between now and the future and charge off to try and make the future happen. Now, that I've written several articles going against that, and I think I'll get back to you in a minute, but just wanted to frame it. Because when I look back at projects and when we look around at the companies and the projects and the things that have worked out and been successful, almost nothing ends up the way that it was envisioned when we started out. It
yeah,
always ends up not only different from what was envisioned at the start, but something that nobody could have envisioned at the start. Nobody had
mm,
even thought of when it ended up being there. And that's true of all sorts of companies you can think of, like the classic one that everybody's got, Slack, started out as a vision of a collaborative multiplayer game. And
yeah,
it was a tool that was used to help the team create this game. The game was a failure, but Slack was the success. And no one was planning Slack at the start of it. It
yeah,
was something where it emerged from what people were doing already, and they doubled down on it. And that's where we get to something like Estuarine is you're looking
yeah,
at what is going on at the moment, the patterns that you've currently got, and you're looking to say, well, what can we change to manage the evolutionary potential of the present rather than trying to set a vision and chase towards it. And to,
mm,
just to round off that final point, then I'll let you talk again. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't say don't have visions. Try to wipe the vision from your mind because we recognize everybody has internal visions, which are
mm,
sort of visions, but a lot of it is quite fluffy and implicit. And we have things that we would like to have happen. It's a natural
yeah,
way of humans operating. Where the problems start, I think, is when you try to make the vision explicit, because now
mm,
it becomes political. Now it's about who of the many people get to be the one that controls which vision is the one we're going after. And in almost every case, then some vision will win, and that has now got a load of sunk cost behind it. And that means it's very difficult to let it go, even when all the signals are saying that's not going to happen. And we can't actually have that vision from where we are today. And I think that's where Estrin comes in. It says, don't make the visions explicit. Work with a level of granularity where everybody's vision is fine. We're not going to fight about it. We're just going to see, well, what can we do today anyway?
Hmm. So I'm wondering because so that I think Slack is an interesting example. So as you said, like it's well known that they are started out with we want to make a game. So they had a vision of some game, probably. And they pivoted at some point to, oh, we have like a group chat, team chat thingy, which was another vision, I would say. So they were able to pivot.
Yep.
But I'm wondering if they never would have a vision, if they would ever ended up anywhere. And still, if you say like, okay, Slack doesn't need to have a vision, um, are there teams now who are still making games? And I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, well, there are teams making games in the world, aren't there? And so,
No, I mean within
yeah.
Slack.
Oh, within Slack. I suppose,
Yeah,
are there little games happening within Slack? But yeah,
yeah.
no, I think,
You know what I mean.
yeah,
For me, the question is like, so I completely agree that visions get, especially like early on in a company, like you pivot from that, and you're supposed to pivot from that.
yeah,
It's like to be too stubborn on something, which is doesn't work, is not like leading you somewhere, is not the right thing. But at the same time, I think like without some common like agreed problem to solve, it would be really hard. And especially like as you scale. So pivoting for like a 5 people startup or something like that, it's quite easy and quite natural. You don't have like this many political games and so on and so on. It's probably really easy. Looking at a bigger company,
I
it
haven't
depends.
seen it to be that easy, but yeah,
It depends, of course, but it's like it's a more clear influence. There is often a more clear power play. There are
yeah,
usually not 5 founders, there's 1 or 2 who have to make up their minds and so on. In a bigger company, I agree, it's like a complex thing to come to a shared understanding where the company is heading for. And that's
yeah. And
why a
this,
lot
yes,
of companies are usually quite hierarchically because somebody needs to make this decision.
they're quite, did you say hierarchical?
Yeah,
Yeah,
hierarchical.
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody needs to make this decision. Yes, so yeah, I think you make a good point. And there's a thing here which there's no point as well fighting against it when companies want to set a strong
Mm,
vision and go towards it. Absolutely, yeah. I'm not going to say don't do it because you just end up with a fight and there's no point. Um, what I would tend to do is say, absolutely, set your vision, go wild, but make sure you're holding it very lightly. Don't set it in stone. And
mm,
the big mistake that I have seen is, well, in those big companies, you end up with what I call the vision chasm, which is you've got those senior leaders playing the political games, telling lovely stories about this vision, which is really good for investors, for getting funding, and for telling a lovely story about how we're going to make things better in the world. And that's sort of sometime in the future. And then you've got the folks actually working, doing stuff right now, fighting fires, fixing the problems on the ground. And in between what's happening to they know what they're doing for the next 3 weeks. And then there's this rosy future painted for some time in the future. And in between there's just a chasm. And there's
yeah.
nobody can join up the two. And that's the world where strategy comes in. My contention is that setting your strategy to say we are trying to build this exact future and then work backwards from it and fill in all the steps,
Mm,
that is a really bad way to do strategy because you're just layering up risk after risk after risk after risk after risk, assumption after assumption, and it's never going to happen. no one has ever succeeded with that form of strategy,
Yeah, yeah.
would be my
No,
contention.
I completely agree. I completely agree.
Yeah,
If you set like this vision and then be like, okay, let's make a plan for the vision
yeah,
and then like execute for the next couple of years,
exactly. And
you
that's what you
won't
see
end up
then.
there. Yeah, yeah,
People go down and naturally say, oh, well, somebody has sorted it out. They're going to make everything happen. So we better build the thing that's ready for when we've got 1 million customers. And we talked about that later, didn't we? Let's
yeah,
just go heads down, like you say, heads down, a couple of years. We'll build the
yeah,
big
yeah,
thing that scales. And then
yeah,
they launch it, and there's no customers at all. It doesn't need to scale because it's not the right thing in the first
yeah.
place.
No, totally.
Yeah. And so, yeah, how do you sort of think about managing that, I suppose?
So for me, it's like, so what I like in product visions is to be really clear about the problem to solve, to really like imagine more or less the new reality of your customer, of your users, of the ecosystem, and so on and so on. And it really depends on the culture of the company, how how explicit this is.
Mhm.
In my experience, sometimes it helps. So if the company is like able to be like, okay, we have like this vision type, which is really concrete, which is really showing the what we are after. But everybody knows like, okay, this will never look like that. We know that it's in our culture that we totally accept that. No, nobody will come like to the idea that whatever somebody did 2 years ago
Yeah.
is like exactly how it's looked like.
Have you seen that actually work though?
Yes, in a small scale. So I worked in several startups for internal tooling where we did something like that, where we did a vision type and we like quite concrete how exactly this is working more or less to have like the first thing an artifact to really discuss about.
Yeah.
If this is this the thing we are aiming to?
Yeah, cool. This gets at something a next level that's interesting, which is different domains require different methods.
Mm.
And what I'm hearing there is there's internal tooling. There are probably processes which are reasonably stable, and people need to get certain things.
Mm.
There's a problem which is reasonably well
Yeah,
understood, really quite well understood.
yeah, yeah. So the problem, exactly, the problem is well
Yeah.
understood. But I think that's the starting point for a vision that you understand the problem you want to solve.
Yes. And that's where it gets to be a problem, a problem. I think the
Mm.
problem solution framing starts to fall apart once you head into uncertainty, once you head into complexity, because problems are not contained things. They problem is a
Yeah,
label that we
yeah, yeah,
use to describe a pattern of stuff that we don't like. And different people look at the same pattern and see it differently. One
yeah,
person's problem is another person's happy time.
yeah,
It's fine for someone else, like they don't, or they
yeah.
don't even see it. They see it as a different shape. They see a different angle on it, etc., etc. So getting really clear about the problem in a complex situation isn't something you can really do.
Do you have an example there where it's so because I think problems are always like have this fuzziness and so on
Yeah.
and so on. You can't like really contain it, especially if it's like a bigger thing. If it's not
Yeah.
like
Well, then you get to the thing, like there's another thing I've been thinking about recently, which is that problems and solutions are descriptions of one another. So
mm,
we often want to try and have this dream of, well, let's define the problem in absentia of solutions.
mm,
But I don't think you can. I think inevitably it's rather like the vision thing, subconsciously at least, or implicitly, you have to be considering solutions while you are defining problems. You
yeah,
don't define a problem that you can't imagine or envisage some sort of solution
mm,
for. That doesn't mean your solution is possible or reasonable or or that you are capable of doing it,
mm,
but there needs to be some sort of imagined solution. which means that the problems we can see are also limited by the solutions we can consider, and vice versa.
Yeah, interesting. So
I think I'm fighting again against this. There's a sort of a desire that things can be linear and that we can, if we can get that problem nailed down,
no,
then we
no, no,
can get the
no.
solution nailed down.
No, no. I completely agree. Like on you, you can't out-design yourself. Out.
Yeah.
It's like it's like the worst thing you can try to outthink yourself, to whiteboard everything, and so on and so on. For everything, for like organization
Oh yeah.
transformation, to like big complex solutions, to like product and so on and so on. Like,
Yeah.
completely be on the same page there.
Yeah. It's staying
And
in thought land, that isn't it? It's when you just like you can solve it all in imaginary
yeah,
world,
exactly.
but
Yeah,
then you
yeah,
go to reality and it's
yeah,
different from imaginary world somehow.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I'm
Uh,
interested to know then, so this example you gave, like you had
mhm.
this internal tooling thing, defined the problem, and you set like a vision, and then you're able to use that helpfully.
Mm. It is more like for me, it's a tool for like the first thing is focusing to be like, okay, this is like the direction we can all agree to.
Yeah.
So it's a communication tool in the end. It's like, so are we all agree that this is like the right direction? Don't discuss about like this single button or this single feature or this single capability. But like, is this like a story everybody can agree? With knowing that, of course, like in the nuances, people are not agreeing. But this
Mm.
is, I think, not so important. But it's more important that like everybody's like, okay, these are the people we seeing the problem. We are talking about the same people. We are talking about the same situations. We are talking about like all these things. And then like back to your point with the there is no problem without a solution in mind. I tend to agree there. And at the same time, so I call them often approaches.
Hmm.
So it's not that like I try to get people away from, because I think that the most human thing is like, I see a problem, I want to fix it.
Yeah.
So I have an idea.
Oh, it's the natural thing. Yeah, of course. We don't even actually perceive the problem consciously. Ideas are just, well, there's stuff, this risks we're trying to distance ourselves from.
Yeah,
We have ideas. We tend to have ideas that we have just seen around a lot that are highly available. And so it's like, well, let's apply that idea. It feels like it's going to be right. You don't
yeah,
need to define the problem in order to have that idea, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's why I'm always trying to drag the people back into the problem space, to
Ah,
drag them
interesting.
more into like, okay, how well are you understanding at least? Can you describe like what is the situation? What is the people currently doing? That's another thing, because like often it isn't even a problem.
Yeah. Well, it's not maybe the biggest problem.
Or the
It's a
biggest
problem to
problem, yeah.
someone.
It's a
Someone's
problem.
upset about it.
Yeah,
Otherwise, they
someone's
wouldn't be
upset
having
about
ideas.
it, or
This
it
is
it looks
it's reminded
interesting.
me of
Yeah,
this solution
yeah,
Aikido, which is same like I gave up fighting that because I saw it so many times. People like, oh, don't bring me solutions, bring me problems. I want to solve the problems. Well, everyone wants to solve problems. That's what
yeah,
we do as
exactly.
humans. It's not, we don't get to do that as designers because we're special or something. We need to work with people and do it naturally. So yeah, I think same kind of idea. I tend to say embrace it. Let's look at this idea
Yeah,
and pick it apart in ways where we can just explore what it means to you.
exactly.
And then we can play with more ideas.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, what you described resonates with me. What I've done in the past, when it's that kind of situation, and we know, look, there's a current situation and we want to change things, is use more of a storyboarding approach. So we don't show, assuming it's a digital thing, you
yeah,
don't see any of the UI. There is no UI designed.
yeah,
There's a story of a person, and their life being better.
Yeah.
And they might be holding a phone at some point, but you don't see what's on the phone. You only see how they're experiencing it better. So you
Yeah.
don't even get the problem of starting to pattern and train people on, well, it's going to look like this. You
Yeah.
might get the problem of pattern and training people that it's going to be a mobile phone app, which you might not want either.
Yeah. And that I think where it's so important to understand like the environment
Yeah.
for like the vision. So
Yeah.
and
Because I've seen it too many times when it does, it just people get locked onto,
yeah,
oh,
totally.
well, that's what it is. We can now relax and stop worrying about whether it's possible. They've envisioned it. Of course it's possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's
And
just go
somebody
and code
already
things.
thought about that all things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody sorted it out. I'd have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly
Yeah.
it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Another way that this can work, and I think Harfan is a good person to follow for this kind of thing, is
Sorry.
multiple Harfan. You might have seen her. She's on social media. HA space PHAN. Very worth following.
Okay.
But multiple parallel contradictory artifacts is another way to go.
Mm,
We set
yeah.
the vision, and this is something I'm going to be talking about at some conference later this year, using pitch provocations to lay out a range of visions and try
Yeah.
and make them as broad as possible. So we see, yeah, it's that direction, but it's not that line. It's
Yeah.
anywhere in that kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah. A future.
angle space we could
Yeah.
be heading towards.
Yeah. Yeah. So typical like future cone looking in possible futures and futures we want to have and so on and so on. Yeah.
Exactly, which again, that's okay if you're in an ordered domain or a liminal sort of space where you can actually use a cone of futures. Once you get into complexity, it's actually a bit of a cheat because
Yeah.
it suggests that you can predict something about the future that you actually can't.
Of course. Yeah. No, I completely agree there that
But
like
yeah, there's something about giving people enough of an emotional like drive to take motion, to take steps forward and
not
then find out what's happening.
yeah, for me it's not just the emotion thing. It's like it's one part, the motivational part and the inspirational part. But the other part is really the how we like running at least in the same direction.
Yeah, which is, and
It,
that's where it becomes a sort of a, you actually don't want to all be running in
yeah,
the same direction.
exactly. And that's really interesting because it's so on one hand you want that. You
Yeah,
you want to have like that people are aligned,
yeah.
but
Well, that is the thing that like it feels like that's right, doesn't it? Because obviously we've got this vision. That's the risk of vision. We've got this vision. Of course, it makes sense if we're all going towards the vision. If people are going away from the vision, that's costing us energy. It's not efficient.
yeah.
But that's the big lie, isn't it?
Why is it the big lie? Because you're ignoring other opportunities or
Yeah, so one way I'd say of looking at this is if you are focused on a point on the horizon, you're
mm,
going to fall into holes right in front of you that you're not
mm,
seeing because you're
yeah,
too busy looking out into the distance, looking at a mirage, probably. Um,
mm,
Another way to say it is if you reduce variation, you stop evolution.
yeah,
So you kill the possibility for evolution to happen if everything is completely homogeneous. Fortunately, you can't make people align on a vision because people are naturally going to have variation.
mm,
What you then get is your supposed efficiency is actually incredibly expensive because you have to spend vast amounts of energy and time pulling people back onto alignment all the time and
yeah,
quelling any sort of natural variation that pops up.
yeah,
And it assumes that somebody, the person who is the master of that vision, has the ability to see the future. And I've not met anyone who actually has so far. Maybe you have.
no, no, of course not. It's really interesting because it's like a wide spectrum because so you described before that you see like this fallacy of somebody made up their mind in the beginning and everybody is believing the story and is just running again behind this,
Yeah.
which is like totally I've seen that a bit but not that much. I rather see like everybody runs in a completely different direction.
Yes, which is and so that's where we get into an interesting place where it's not alignment you want as much as it's coherence. Or
Yeah,
there's something it's worth looking at JP Castlin. Have you seen his
yeah, I
newsletter?
know. Yeah,
So his framework is not fully released yet, so I'm sort of
yeah.
abstracting bits of it. But rather than a vision, he frames the A as aspiration, which
Mm.
is, I think, a much fuzzier version of vision.
Mm.
For B, he sets boundaries, and his argument for this is rather than alignment, which is a single line in the sand that we all have to walk along,
Yeah.
instead you set boundaries, which are two lines in the sand, and you can bimble about between the boundaries,
Mm.
explore all of that space.
Mm.
So, and this gets at something that I think we could talk about as well, which is it's sometimes much easier, especially politically, to get coherent alignment around what we don't want to be, the directions we're definitely not going to go in,
Yeah,
than it is to get alignment about where we do want to be.
yeah, yeah.
Because that's when it gets political. Then you get into these situations where people are traveling forwards and imagining the implications of that vision and seeing, well, am I losing something in that vision of the world? That's their idea. So I'm losing status and I don't want to support that. And I don't see a place for my department in that vision. I want the vision where my department is the ones who are the heroes out the front. So I'm going to
Mm.
fight for that vision. And so that's when it becomes the fight. And it's something as designers and researchers, we massively overlook that habitually, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. But I agree that that's like yeah, that's probably also like alignment and coherence. That's an interesting difference. That's maybe also a language thingy for me.
Could
Being
be. Yeah, yeah.
being not a, a like first language English speaker. So that's interesting. Yeah, because in my mind, alignment would be like this like tunnel of possibilities.
Mm.
Um, instead of like, okay, it's like everybody is exactly at the same track. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think it can be in practice when people use the word alignment, you don't know what they mean. And it could
yeah,
be anything from that single line to
yeah,
a very broad spectrum. But because you don't know what that means exactly when you talk with people, there's the risk, I think. It's a tricky
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I think, I mean, what's worth noting as well is there is a tension here because, I mean, I'm experiencing it now. I've had a cool thing that I've got no idea about. And I'm thinking that'd be cool as
Mm,
a way of framing the way that I run my business. And I had this idea about a week ago.
mm,
Um, I could tell you about it now. As I'm sort of I want to try and probe this now, but I feel the tension because I can kind of now travel forwards in the future to a time when this vision is working and I've got this idea and it's cool and it's doing all this amazing stuff. And the temptation is to do that thing of, well, I'll build it in the garage and I'll make sure it looks cool and it's ready before I share it with the world.
mm,
I know enough to know, though, that the reality is that it will fail if I do that. And what I need to do is instead go and poke the market right now and learn what parts of this actually work, what parts of this are not going to work.
yeah,
And I'm going to have to evolve this, co-evolve with the market,
yeah.
not build it and then ship the vision.
Okay, yeah.
And but that's painful and it's scary because what if my cool thing has to die? What if this cool thing that I've only put a tiny bit of energy into so
Yeah,
far, but it feels precious now,
yeah,
and
of course.
I don't want to. I don't want to subject it. And I
Yeah.
think that's the other thing that's happening a lot of the time is playing with vision is an excuse for not going out and learning about reality.
Yes, totally for sure. But I also would say that like you can't do a vision in like empty space. or you can do for sure. You can do. You
Oh, you
shouldn't.
can. Yeah, you
You
shouldn't.
shouldn't do. Yeah, I
And
think
this then gets
that's
to the,
exactly like
yeah,
that's often a big problem you see with like people doing product visions or something like that, that they're like they know nothing about like the actual market, the actual environment,
yeah.
and they make something up. They make some up their great idea. They have like their their great epiphany or whatever,
Yeah,
and they vision that, they make it really concrete and be like, okay, we are just building that now,
yeah.
and we'll ship it when it's ready. And then it's like they maybe label it even as MVP because they like
Well,
excluded
that's the way you
two
get
really crazy features, and then
exactly.
their MVP. And then it's like, okay, we need to build our MVP for 3 years. This is the
Yeah.
vision. Let's do it.
It's an MVP because it only took 3 years. It's like, what?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's an MVP at the end when you're just like so frustrated at how long it's taking. The other thing you see is you start that MVP process with so much confidence because you don't know what you don't know. And then
Exactly.
as you build for 3 years, your
Yeah.
confidence starts dropping because
Yeah.
bits leak
But
out and you start realizing it's not going to work.
yeah.
And then you
And then
start adding more features on it.
you're in the sunk cost fallacy and you're dragging on and dragging on. Of course. And then
That
you
is
have
the,
politics that nobody wants to lose their face and so on and
yep,
so on. Yeah.
it's
But
too big to fail,
yeah,
which
exactly.
is where you get to, well, actually, variety is better. Rather than one or two massive bets, like if you're betting, I wrote about this on LinkedIn earlier. If you're
Mm.
making bets, if you're a poker player, you know that bankroll matters. And you
Yeah.
don't take your whole bankroll and put it on one hand
Yeah,
or
of
use it in
course.
one game. You split your bankroll over 100 games. And that's what you need to do with your product bets as well. Don't make the one big vision. Try dozens of tiny things. And then that's where we get to then what you see starting to work. Well, when you try lots of tiny
Mm.
things, you poke the market and you learn about patterns that are like, oh, there's something
Yeah.
there. That's
Yeah.
interesting. And that's
Yeah.
what I think where you were talking about. Then once you've got that emergence happening, which you can provoke, but you can't just have for free. Once you get that emergence, then you start to have an idea of what a vision might be.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I
So
think
for
within
me,
the
it's really like
market,
you have to be like before like explore the market, understand like what's happening, understand your options also.
yep,
So being like before doubling down on a vision, being like, okay, these are like the options I see right now. I explored a little bit, talk to people. I might also tried some things like really easy prototypes, really easy whatever, did it manually,
do it
whatever,
manually. Yeah, that's the killer. Put
things
out
like
the
that.
offer and deliver, give it to like three people by hand.
Exactly,
See,
exactly. And then you produce your vision.
yeah.
That would be the
Well,
process.
then, except where in terms of how much you know about the market, it's always day one. You
Yeah,
always know nothing compared to the total that you could know, because reality has a surprising amount of detail.
yeah.
So in my world, you don't ever go, right, we've done enough market research now to know the vision that we need to set. You always have to be open to adaptation until the point where you've now got a successful company, you've delivered this to 100 customers, a
Yeah,
thousand customers, 10,000
yeah,
customers. At that point, fair enough, you can be confident that your thing worked, but you can never be confident about your vision before you've got to that point where it actually is working.
yeah, for sure, totally.
Yeah.
But that's I think that's also the job of the vision, to have something to explore, to not like jump every other day at the next interesting
Oh, the
thing.
next cool thing. Yeah, which is fascinating because then it gets at I think another thing that I work with teams, and I bet you do this too, is forget the UI. Just skip the cool screens.
Mm,
Instead, go back to the behaviors. So what is the customer doing? What are they
yeah,
doing at the moment? How do
Yeah.
they find us?
Yeah.
How do they choose us? Why do they choose us over anyone else? And then what do they need to do differently in order to get the value from us? And then look at those core behaviors. Can we stimulate those at all? Or when we go and we make that offer, does anybody take us up? No, they're
Yeah.
not interested most of the time.
Yeah.
It's very easy to think, well, we need to have a screen designed or like
Mm.
an app with login and features and blah blah
Yeah.
blah. And you don't need that to get at the behavior level. And that, I suppose, would you count that as a sort of a vision, or is it a different thing?
Yeah, so for me, a vision could be like, as you say, like a storyboard, also like a flow or something like that. Um, the tricky thing is, I think for product people, all these artifacts might work well, but try to align like a whole organization around that.
Yeah, that is, and then you get to there is an optics angle to this, etc.,
So,
etc.
so
But I
you
think,
need sometimes, I think, like a quite concrete thing, and the
yeah,
people producing it at least, but probably also that they should be like totally aware that this is this is science fiction.
yeah. I heard a story from an ex-colleague who had been in a company where he was able to do real like emergent discovery type stuff.
Mm,
And he was saying he was able to do that in this company because his boss gave him air cover by telling the science fiction stories. So once
mm,
a quarter, the boss would come and say, "Hey, we need some science fiction stuff." And they would just come up with some just crazy, impossible
yeah.
concepts that the boss could then bandy about in the all hands. And then they'd be left alone to go and do their work properly.
Mm,
So I think what you're getting at maybe is the need to play the game. But what I'd say there is, yeah, lean into it and go wild. Try like make your artifacts that are just impossible so that you can't ever be expected to deliver them for real.
again, for me,
Present them with caveats.
yeah, exactly. To present them with caveats for sure. Be totally clear that this is like a product vision in the sense of we don't know a lot about this stuff right now, but we think this is a target. And like it's fuzzy and we will learn a lot, but we need something to agree upon for the direction and also to inspire.
Yeah, I think we're talking at cross purposes a little bit. I think
Yeah.
inspire and keep people busy. Like, because what you want, I think you want this. I think you want your product, the product people, the people
Mhm.
doing the discovery and looking for the emergent growth. I think you want them to have time to play with really ugly things and
Yeah.
get the emergence to happen. But I think that's very hard, like you say, for people in other disciplines, the rest of the organization, to really follow along with and understand. It looks like you're doing a bad job, potentially. So the optics are hard.
Yeah.
So I think you want then your product team to create multiple visions of like exciting science fiction futures, none of which risk making the product team think that they're actually going towards that, but which keep the rest of
Yeah.
the organization thinking, hey, look, they're innovative and they're thinking of cool ideas. They're playing with the latest things because I've seen it in multiple organizations. There is the latest cool technology, whether it's crypto or AI or
Yeah.
apps or whatever, it's been different things at different times, which is very zeitgeisty. And in your all hands at these big companies, loads of people in the company are saying, hey, what are we doing about cool zeitgeisty thing?
Yeah.
And what you need is the product team to be going, oh, well, we're envisaging these future exciting science fiction scenarios. And you play into that story in order to stop perhaps scrutiny happening and to show that you're considering them, like you are genuinely considering it. You're playing how it might work out. I think the thing you want to do though is never risk having that fool your organization into thinking that you're actually going to do something like that. That's the line you're trying to tread, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's not about like that much about the internal political stuff to like shield yourself that people are not like poking you too much or something like that. It's more for me like that it the story sales tells and the story marketing tells is the same that also the product people are telling.
Ah, but that should never be about the vision because your customers don't care. Like they want to know what does it do now. I want to know what can I do with it today, not where you're going to be in 2 years. Like they might want to know that you are still growing and that you're developing and evolving with the market. So you
Yeah.
might sprinkle some of these ideas in, but again, it doesn't need to be something legitimate and real. Because if you show that to
No,
customers,
no,
you
I
start
don't think
getting
it's
on the
about
hook to deliver it, don't you?
I don't say that this is like the story you tell to customers, but I think the anchor for everybody is needed to
Yeah,
be able to tell a story. Because
yeah,
if you
that's
just
fair.
tell like the whatever we are doing, and it's always a little bit like in marketing and sales and product, it's always like the what's next.
Yeah,
Everybody is like asking like, okay, what are we doing next? What's next? What's next? And I think this needs an anchor because
yeah, but I think isn't vision a terrible anchor? Because you just said with the vision, you're setting something that you know you're not going to do because you know the vision is wrong. And so you're then sharing something, and then people are going to be disappointed. That's where I get stuck with it. It's like, hey, look, and that's where I'd say,
yeah.
look, we don't know exactly what we're doing next, but these are some directions we're exploring. There's these cool 8 different futures that we're envisaging, and we don't know, but hey, look, isn't it cool? And that's exciting. That's a story. That's an engaging narrative.
I think it's a very interesting idea, but I never saw that. That like
Mm.
that like people are really making explicit multiverse visions more or less to be like to go really in this. So I see that in scenario
Yeah.
planning, but that's more about like what are the influences for our company and more in this direction. But I don't see that much in vision. I think it's interesting, but I'm wondering if this will lead to confusion
I mean, it
because
might do.
everybody takes their like their favorite story out of this and is then running
Yeah.
behind this story.
They probably are. That's actually a benefit in itself because you're doing probes internally as well as externally. You want to know which, because do you know already exactly which of your like design concepts is going to resonate the best with the market and with internal teams? I found what I needed to do was just put out a bunch of different probes and different concepts, and then some of them would get traction behind them, both with the
But
customers
that's on a
and
technical
internally.
level, right? That's like on a small level.
No, but bigger level as well. I think there's a thing of, I suppose, where are you putting your vision? How far out into the future? Because there's an argument that, well, you need to pin down reasonably tightly what you're doing in the next 2 weeks, probably in
Okay,
the next four
that's
weeks.
not a vision.
That's not a vision, that's just doing
No.
the work.
Yeah.
So where does vision begin, I suppose? Is that 2 years, 1 year, 6 months,
No, for me it's like at least 3 years,
3 years? Yeah.
at least. And it depends a little bit like on how quick are you, how evolved are you, and so on. It's getting more and more stable in my experience, usually. Because you already have a lot of stuff, it's more clearer what exact market you have, and so on and so on. If you're starting out, I would say the vision is anyway implicit. Like if you have like a
Yeah.
small team, they have an idea, and so on and so on. They shouldn't care that much about like we have to do vision and whatever. If they don't have like some direction already, then probably they're getting totally lost.
Yeah.
Or they're also for them it's also totally fine to like play around and explore over and over and doing like quick experimentation. But if you have like 5,000 people, you can't do that anymore.
See, that's interesting. That is it's a thing I think a lot of people say. If you've got 5,000 people, you can't do experimentation anymore.
No, 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 no. That's not what I say. You
No,
can
but
do a lot
yeah,
of experimentation,
yeah.
but you can't change your vision every month.
Ah, right, yeah. But I think
You
that's
can't
where
change
my
the
argument is.
direction every month.
Yeah, okay. So then I think that that's when we get to, do you need an explicit vision in order to have a direction? And I think, as you said, once you're big, 5,000
Mm.
people, you have a ton of constraints. Your
Mm.
adjacent possible is pretty constrained. There's
Yeah,
not an infinite amount of stuff you can do.
yeah.
What you can do, and I heard about this from someone who worked at Dyson. So at
Mm.
Dyson, they had identified something in the market for one of their tools. I can't remember which one it was, whether it was fans or hoovers or
Mm.
whatever. What they did, they had the resources and the time and the appetite to set, I think it was 5 different teams at the
Mm.
same market challenge, separately, working on the same product,
Yeah,
basically. And they were all able to explore it and do different things with that product in order to
yeah.
find out which of those would work. And they were exploring, I think, a bit broader in the market. Now, they were working in a commodity market. Vacuum cleaners is not
Yeah,
exactly like, I mean, it's innovation when Dyson did it because
yeah,
they were playing in this space where
yeah,
the person on the team said they didn't like it. The people on the teams found it unpleasant because they were competing against other teams who were
mm,
also trying to win in this race of building the
yeah,
most saleable, effective, coolest vacuum cleaner. So, and that's, I think, an interesting tension here is it might not be nice, but they didn't set a vision for this is what the vacuum cleaner will be like. They said, here's a market opportunity. Can you go and figure out something cool in a huge company? Which is another way
yeah.
to
But
play it,
out
maybe.
of this process came more or less a product with a product vision, right? They didn't
Oh,
like
no,
finalize,
out of the process came a product that they could then manufacture.
but probably not like the final thing. But it's also like a commodity market and a production market, so it's quite different because there you have the more the R&D, like R&D and production are two different things,
Yeah,
which you don't have in digital products in most cases.
yeah, where there isn't a production line, even though people
Exactly.
would like there to be a production line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
But you
treat it as if there is. And
exactly, but
yeah,
you
that doesn't really
just
help.
don't have, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. There is definitely a tension there. And I think that the
Yes.
thing that's challenging is, again, most companies that I've worked with, it feels to them like it's inefficient to do something like that Dyson example
Yeah.
because you're doing rework,
But for
obviously, aren't
me,
you?
that's a completely separate, for me, that's really a completely separate thing. The one
Interesting.
the one
See,
thing
I
is like
think you can do
how you
this.
work.
Yeah.
The one thing is like how you work, like doing experimentation, doing discovery, being like really de-risking things before doing them, and so on and so on. Also revisiting your strategy, be data informed, and all these things
Yeah.
to like be really in this adapting mode. But the other thing is this, that everybody is like there is a direction. And for me, a good tool for direction is getting explicit in a vision.
Cool. I think we get to the heart of this and the heart of where we disagree. And I
Mm,
think it's the getting explicit
mm,
that I have a problem with. I think when you get explicit, that's when the problems start. That's when all gaming starts. It's when people who are good at power games know how to play and win.
mm,
And I think it's when you start closing down your ability to sense and respond to ambiguity. Because by making it explicit, you're it's a pretense. And I think what you need, and I've used this, I was thinking
Yeah.
through what are some examples? Like there is a way you can do um, there is a way you can do this like multiple probing with a
Mm-hmm.
smaller team and in a digital space. And I'll
Yeah.
share a couple of ideas. But I think one of the things that I found is you need to find a prompt that's sufficiently ambiguous, that's not too concrete. You want to use ambiguity as your friend. So not completely ambiguous, not the you need to be
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with ambiguity because nobody knows what we're doing and we're running around like headless chickens. There's too much ambiguity, but I
Mm-hmm.
think there's also possibly too little ambiguity once you
Yeah.
make an explicit vision. So one there's a method where you let go of any kind of vision or sense of what you should be doing next, any
Mm-hmm.
sense of like controlling the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
You create trios where you send a senior systems architect who is really like grizzled like me and cynical and knows how big systems work and knows that it's not going to be possible, and a junior prototyper who's really excited and energetic and can work really quickly and have amazing left field ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
you put them together with an actual user in the marketplace. And you probably train the user to speak to technical people,
Mm-hmm.
because training technical people to speak to users is really hard. And because again, like massive introduction of ambiguity makes
Yeah.
things very difficult. But you put those trios together and you make
Mm-hmm.
lots of them. And you don't go, it's kind of like a mini hackathon, like a
Yeah.
hackathon. So hackathons are another great example. Lightly constrained, but what you get, there's an explosion of variety. You get
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of things happening that you couldn't have thought of in the first place because you're putting together these groups who wouldn't normally work together to come up with something for a while. And it's time constrained. So you might give them a week or 2 days or maybe a month if you're feeling bold. And they make something. And
Mm-hmm.
then you get to see from the variety that you've made, ideally, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 different things, which of those resonate, which have legs, which are the ones where other users are coming going, hey, that's cool. Can I have that? And then you don't, that's visionless vision. You're allowing emergence to happen without trying to constrain everybody to be going in the same direction all the time. There's a version of this that I've done with teams
But you
where,
have to converge at some time, right? So
oh
if
yeah, but
you
you do that later once you've allowed something to emerge.
we completely agree there.
Yeah. But that is what you're not doing at that is setting a vision at any point. You're only working with, well, here's a thing that works. Let's do the next thing to that. Let's diverge again and find the next
Mm-hmm.
version that works.
Mm-hmm.
Not let's set a vision. Imagine that we can solve all of the problems to get it in front of customers and have them choose it and make it solve all
Mm-hmm.
of their problems. That's a fantasy. I think it's a fantasy that designers love to enjoy because it feels great to solve those problems.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's like a sort of
Completely.
a we are the special person
Yeah,
fantasy,
yeah.
I think.
But we agree that's like unrealistic.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, but there's a version of that method that I made more rapid because in
mhm.
most organizations people are not up for allowing that space for
Yeah.
hackathons. But hackathon's another great example. I'll share this in a minute. It was in another chat the other day. It was really like, oh God, that's absolutely chilling. But there's a version called Shaping Trios where all you're doing is saying we have this kind of vaguely ambiguous target. So we're going in the same direction, but
Mhm.
we don't know what the answer is yet.
Yeah.
This kind of vague problem, and it's just a statement, maybe with a couple of recordings of users or a quote
Mhm.
from a user, something like that. You break the team then into trios. So
Mhm.
you need a fairly big team for this, but you get a load of different trios, and you just give them an hour to write down their framing of the problem, the solution that
Mhm.
they think we should go towards, a couple of other details, and like the next step you're going to take. What's the single next
Mhm.
step you want to take? And then you get everyone back and they pitch their thing to the rest of the group. And everyone's just
Mhm.
noticing what's similar, what's different, what's surprising. And what you're looking for is there are three sort of outcomes that happen. One is everyone basically says the same thing. And it's like, yeah, we all have already converged on this without being forced to converge. Well, great. Then we can just go and do that. And there might be a couple of details to iron out, but great, we'll go and do it. And I suppose that's then setting a vision in a way. The other thing that happens is you get lots of different coherent hypotheses, lots of different ideas for what the next step might be and what they think the problem is, etc., etc. But they're all coherent, they all make sense. They
Mm,
can't all be true, but none of them are nonsensical, if that makes
mm,
sense. In that
yeah,
case, you're going to need to do some sort of probing. You need to make multiple versions and
yeah,
see which direction actually then has some emergence. And there's another
yeah,
thing that happens, which is it's incoherent and people don't know where to start and nothing really makes sense and everyone's confused. And when they're pitching, it's just a sort of we didn't really know what we were doing. And that's a clue that either you framed it really badly in the first place, or that actually you don't know enough yet. And it's that thing you said earlier, where if you don't know
mm,
anything about the market, the
yeah,
users, etc., you
yeah,
need to go and find something out first.
exactly.
And that I found you can do that in an hour, and it just gives you this sort of it's a way of getting to an abductive sense of
Mm,
where are we at and what can we do meaningfully next.
mm,
But again,
yeah.
you don't need a vision. It's just a roughly set direction.
And how do you scale this? So like looking at the usual product companies, you have like one product with like a plethora of teams working on this product. It's cut down into smaller, like virtual products, more or less, with PMs on that and so on and so on. So the
Yeah.
typical model, a lot of scale-ups work in.
Yeah.
So
So I
and
think
these
then you
teams
get
are
into,
working like that. So the teams have like engineering, design, product management in one team together. They are
yeah,
doing a lot of discovery work and so on and so on.
God, yeah, then you're getting into another world of how do you manage for innovation? And in fact, do you want to manage for innovation? I would say these big companies, they probably do, because
Mm,
otherwise they're going to have insufficient variation. And when the market shifts, they're not going to be able to cope.
mm,
And so they ought to want to manage for innovation. But what they tend to manage for, late stage bigger companies, is predictability. And innovation is the opposite of predictability.
mm,
And so this relates to a story I heard last week from another Thomas, good name. He was describing a company where they were setting OKRs all the time, and the
mm,
OKRs were supposed to enable innovation, but it was just stultifying, boring.
mm,
It was constraining the thinking so much. No one was doing anything interesting. Everyone was bored with it, and everything took ages, and it didn't really happen.
mm,
They organized a hackathon and everyone in 2 days people just bang solved problems that had been talked
mm,
about for years. Some people did weird things, and that's
mm,
okay. Other people solved problems and it was like, wow, that's incredible. What then happened was the hackathon was put aside and they went back to the boring OKRs and they didn't build on any
yeah.
of the stuff that they just
Interesting. So
opened up.
okay, so they did first steps in a hackathon, but never then
And
followed
this
through.
is and this is like I think a challenge that you see. And there's a really good book by Vaughan Tan called The Uncertainty Mindset,
Mm,
with a caveat that the mindset word should be removed. But he goes and studies top class restaurants, like the
mm,
innovative restaurants who do the incredible, cool gastronomy, all that sort of stuff. Book is really good because he's looking at what the principles are of how you can manage for innovation. And one thing that I can see in the story I just shared is they had they created this space for sparks to happen,
mm,
but there was no oxygen for those sparks to catch kindling and start to grow bigger.
yeah.
It was, and when you've got like a huge company, it kind of
Mm,
makes sense. You are dealing with millions in revenue, and a new spark is going to have zero in revenue. And compared to your main revenue stream, it's going to be nothing for ages because S
yeah,
curves take a long time to
yeah.
kick off. So you're going to kill all those ideas because they're not delivering to the bottom line fast enough. So I think it speaks to companies needing some sort of mechanism and then thinking about Simon Wardley's explorers, villagers, town planners.
Mm,
If your company is full of town planners and there's no villagers, and no explorers, or if you've got a town planners and then the explorers and they just go off and die in the wilderness, then that's not going to create the flows of innovation that you want. You
Yeah,
need to have structures so that things can incubate over time, um, which is another challenge.
yeah. That's like really the challenge for really big companies to have like really completely new revenue streams, new innovations, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. And what kills them, I think, is they try to control it. And they try,
Yeah.
Erica Hall has the lovely phrase, the illusion of deterministic innovation.
Yeah.
They want to be able to set the vision for where they should be
Yeah.
in 5 years and then make it happen.
Yeah.
But what really happens is what we just described. The explorers find something cool and novel that nobody had thought of. The villagers find a way to start making that something with customers. As we talked, it's exactly what you described earlier, I think, is the sort of pattern we're seeing there. And then over time, that grows big enough that it's worth scaling.
Yeah.
But town planners want to just build more towns that are planned.
Yeah.
And so you end up with all these ghost towns with no one in them.
Yeah. That's also like, yeah, the I think 3M was famous with like this Innovation Friday. I think Google also did it for a time.
Yeah,
Um, and so yeah, there are like approaches for this, but yeah,
there
it's hard.
are. It's hard, and there's something that is underappreciated or undershared. It's a really tempting myth, I suppose, again, to believe that if we have a brilliant, innovative idea, it'll immediately catch on. But Xerox PARC is another one, famous for inventing stuff.
Yeah, bad at doing
Incredible
anything about
innovation.
it. Yeah.
Well, they didn't do anything with it because the
Yeah.
management, they didn't get it. And they didn't want the innovation. Every innovation
Yeah.
that Xerox PARC came up with
Yeah.
was despite the best efforts of management, not because of management,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
which is a fun thing.
Yeah.
That's not to say management is bad. We need management.
No. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. Yeah. I think it's the there are a lot of situations where vision is of course not the right answer to. Well, I would
That
say
that might be what we get to, yeah.
getting too early
Yeah.
into like, yeah, we need to have a vision and go into this. And you said something before that like this, where I said like I think the getting explicit is important, and you disagreed, which is interesting because I think like not the being explicit is so important, it's the getting explicit, like this discussion around that.
Ah, okay, yeah, okay. Now that I think I can start to agree with in a sense that, well, what I tend to do, and I think you probably do something different, is or something similar actually, is multiverse mapping
Mm,
or creating like a model where you literally put down the steps that someone's going to take
yeah.
in your hypothetical vision world. Um, I think maybe what it is that I've seen, and maybe what I'm railing against is not the idea of vision in terms of getting explicit about some details.
No.
It's more spending too long getting explicit about details because you can make a quick
Yeah.
map in 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you there, and what I've done this with teams where we've made a map, they've had four different directions they could go in. So
Yeah.
we do a quick map for each of them. It's like an hour-long session.
Yeah.
And what they realize is two of those methods require massive leaps in user behavior that are
Mm,
not likely. And they end up going, well, one of them seems more likely. So
mm,
we'll go and we'll do the experiment around that particular moment that
mm,
matters the most. And it just helps to clarify where is the biggest risk.
yeah.
The worst example, I did this with a client, a company who'd been trying to get a startup going for 4 years. And when we mapped out this thing, what we found was there was this assumption of a particular user behavior that was outrageously high energy gradient, incredibly unlikely to happen.
Mm,
And they'd just been kicking that down the road for 4 years.
mm.
And that was a bit painful.
And I think that there's like this exactly this interesting point where it's like by mapping it out and so on, you can start to poke at it
Yeah.
and also like ask questions about it. And I think that's when I talk about product vision, that's I think that's the interesting momentum that people can like poke on it, ask questions about it, be like, how do you mean that?
Yep.
Because in this like conversations and PowerPoint decks and whatever. So we have like a lot of communication going on all the
Yeah. Oh,
time in
yeah.
all
And it's all
organizations.
abstract. It's
And it's
all, I
all
say the word,
abstract. It's all
you,
everybody hears what they want
yeah.
and so on and so on. So I think like this visioning exercise on one hand to coming to this from like a senior perspective, because it
Yep.
needs to happen on a senior perspective to be like also like with the political backing and so on,
Mhm.
of course informed from everybody else, and then being able to like critique this. That's
Yeah.
like something which I learned like when I was a designer, which is something which I think is a technique nobody else does really. It's like this critique. There's like somebody did something and everybody is standing around is taking it apart.
Yeah. There's a really nice version of that from the Canadian world called Ritual Descent,
Ah,
which
yeah.
I've seen a couple of times, and it's that, but without it for like a spoken narrative, and
Mm.
it's really really cool. But yeah, I think we can conclude with perhaps an agreement that maybe the vision itself is not useful, but the constructing of the vision, the poking and prodding, the critique,
Mm.
that's where the value lies.
Yes. I think it still needs to keep existing because these discussions are ongoing.
Ah, so maybe then it needs to, the way I tend to use mine is these maps that we make keep evolving because we
Mm.
make a map and then within a few days we found out what's wrong about it or add loads more stories and ideas on top and it gets messy and then we realize,
Yeah.
oh, it's actually more like that and we get a new map and
Mm.
it just and it that evolves over time.
Yeah. And I think that there's where the challenge begins with visions that they should be stable
Yeah.
some extent.
And then we get to
Like
that, I think,
where
final
you want to
point.
have the fuzziness, also the acceptance of the audience more or less, that what they see is an one version of the
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah, and that's where I think there's value in not making them look good. Because when they look amazing,
Mm.
well, A, that costs a lot of effort. So you don't
Yeah.
want to update that very often because you put tons of work into that. You don't want to change it. And
Mm.
B, it makes it look more salient, believable. It's like, well, that's
Yeah.
set now, isn't it? So yeah, I think we found a way through this, and that
Yeah.
was good. I need to jump off.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
That's
yeah,
really interesting.
fascinating. Let's ruminate and think through, and then maybe we
Yeah.
could have another chat another time because
Let's
that's
do
fun.
that. It's really interesting. Thanks for that.
Good. Thanks,
Yeah.
Christoph.
See you soon.
See you
Bye
soon.
bye.